Welcome back to the final bit of Bottom Line Africa. With me is Professor Israel Kodiaga. I'm going to engage him shortly. But first, the upcoming forum on China-Africa cooperation, that is FOCAC, is set to promote further collaboration between the two parties. Experts have said the summit has been now scheduled for September 3rd and 4th, respectively, in China's capital, Beijing. Let's listen to that report we had prepared for you earlier. Okay, we are going to run that report shortly for you, but in studio once again I have Professor Israel Kodiaga, who is a global affairs commentator and the director of Southern Delta International in charge of the African region. Prof, good to see you. Welcome to the program. Sorry for that mix-up there.
Yes.
But talk us through about the upcoming summit in Beijing, because China says that the summit will elevate China-Africa cooperation strategic and cooperative partnership to a whole new level. But I'm sure there are critics out there who are saying that, China is the one that is benefiting more out of Africa than Africa benefiting, out of China.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. Well, the forum, it is FOCAC, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, which has been there for the last several years, since 2006 to be precise, and it is a forum based on 10-point areas of common interests, where they talk about mutual interests, they talk about cooperation and a host of others. But that said, they have always had this annual pilgrimage to one of the countries, our member countries, anytime to discuss issues related to China-Africa relations. They are saying they are going to move it to the next level. The next level means China is keen on doing a cost-benefit analysis of how they have worked and where there have been change flaws and what they can do better. Just to inform you, last 2 weeks ago, I just came from China. There was a conference also organized by the China Institutes for Contemporary International Relations, dealing specifically with the African issues as a preparation for this particular conference. So by and large, it is a conference which is for the members, that is the about 52 African nations plus China, to actually reevaluate the relationship and look at how best they can move it to the next level. And
these are countries in Africa that China, I'm sure, have heavily invested in. So the question is, why Africa? Why now? And is Africa benefiting in any way out of it? Because there are people, critics once again, who are saying that, most African countries are just running into huge debts.
Thank you very much. It would be preposterous for us to ask such questions like, why Africa, why now? We need to look at the background of this relationship. First, it should be understood that the relationship between China and Africa did not start yesterday. It started right from the new China in 1949, just when China and Africa started having a relationship which was basically revolutionary and ideological. But never mind, even much earlier, in the earlier centuries, Chinese traders were coming to Africa. So China has always dealt with Africa. You could see during the struggle for independence, China supported Tanzania, supported Mozambique, supported South Africa, and many others. So in fact, the relationship has always been there. Now, what is happening now is that there has been a gap. Africa went through the first phase of colonization, then the struggle for independence, and the post-colonial Africa. Now Europe and the West, who are now the colonial masters and the post-independence partners, somehow left a gap, and China is moving in to fill that gap. That is where the heat is coming from. So there is more heat than light, and that heat is actually as a result of China's entry, and it has nothing to do with whether Africa is benefiting or not.
Does that explain the fact that African countries seem to shy away from the West and they're really warming up towards China?
No, that's not true. First and foremost, we need to understand three things. First and foremost, that China knows what it wants from Africa. Does Africa know what it wants from China? My answer is politically yes, but economically no. The West, unfortunately, by default, have spent a lot of time pontificating on Africa on issues which are at most very trivial. Like you saw when President Obama came to Kenya the other time when he was still president. He had the time to address the Kenyan president on matters of gay and lesbian rights. Those are not issues that bother a country like Kenya. We are talking about infrastructure. We are talking about agriculture. We are talking about health. And these are the areas where China comes in with a huge muscle, while the West spends a lot of time addressing issues of rights.
Yes. Now, Prof, Africa has half of world's gold supply It has 90% of the entire world supply of platinum and cobalt. I mean, the list is endless when it comes to raw material and natural resources. But the main question is, why is Africa, and by extension, of course, Africans, why are Africans still poor up until the moment, despite having all these materials, despite getting heavy investments from China that we've already talked about?
First and foremost, it is true, Africa is not poor, but the people are. In terms of resources, Africa has the largest resources in the whole world. Now, as to why the resources have never benefited Africans, the West and China are all guilty, including the African leadership. It is all about the contracts. It's all about the agreements which are signed at the time that these foreign companies or multinationals are coming to extract African resources. As long as the agreements have not taken cognizance of the needs and aspirations of the people, then forever the people will be poor. So the issue has nothing to do with the people. It has everything to do with governance.
So it's all about governance.
It's all governance because, for instance, if a foreign multinational is coming to extract Kenya, for example, we have oil in Turkana. You know there are issues around that oil. And then the Kenyan government is not coming out clearly to move in tandem first with the county government of Turkana and also to explain to the people the nature of the agreement that they signed with this foreign company. That is where the devil is. The devil is always in the details.
Let's talk about the debt that most African countries has, and let's zero into Kenya, for example. We have a debt of about 4.5 trillion and still counting. The question is, the many economists are wondering if that is sustainable. So China being one of the countries that is, dishing out, loans to Kenya and other African countries, don't you think they should also be concerned in a way if this kind of loans are sustainable at the end of the day?
Well, sustainability is a critical issue. It affects all, but we also have to look at those loans or the projects that come with the loans are in which sectors. If they are infrastructural, then we need them because it is the infrastructure which will actually jumpstart growth in other sectors. So where China has worked on, for example, the standard gauge railway, or where China has done roads and bridges, whether in Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and over, those are critical areas. The problem now is managing the debt and planning how to pay those debts. So it's not about debt per se. We must have debts, but the issue is in which areas. So we should
and whether it's sustainable. I think that's the most important thing.
Sustainability is a long-term thing, which also ties to how are we going to generate the money to repay the debts.
Prof, we have a minute to go before we end the show. Perhaps can you give us a rough picture of how the future between Africa and China, as far as trade is concerned, how does it look like to you?
First of all, the China-Africa relation has challenges and opportunities. Allow me to talk about the challenges. The first challenge is all about sustainability of the debts, which call upon government to plan clearly before they go and take some of these debts. Two, we are talking about the projects, like the infrastructural projects are better done if the countries come regionally. For instance, the East African countries can come together so that they have a road or a rail network that cover the entire place. So they begin as a corporate body. West African countries can do the same. Then they'll benefit more from the infrastructural programs. Then, of course, we have those other things to do with the companies, Chinese companies here. Their labor laws are not in tandem with the local labor laws. Those need to be looked at. Their products, China has both superior and very inferior products. The government, the African governments need to be very strict on the importation so that they know that only the products that should come. The opportunities.
Very briefly.
The opportunities are one, the African countries coming together as a regional bloc in any relationship that they get into with China. Two, we are seeing China literally filling in the gap of which was left by the West. So by and large, this is the best opportunity. And thirdly, the African Union needs to now align their vision of 2063 with the programs that China brings in so that it can benefit the country. Well
said, Prof. I think it all boils down to governance and whether our leaders are keen enough to get benefit out of the deal. Of course, that is Professor Israel Kodiaga, their global affairs commentator. And earlier, we did ask you this on our Twitter poll, free from an arrest to freedom and back to another arrest. We did ask you, what's your view on Bobby Wine's trial? Let's just go through some of the feedback here. Ojiambo Benson says the trials are fabricated because Museveni seemed to be allergic to opposition. And then at Sandra Charity says, no one knew that he had a huge impact not only in Uganda but in the world. So they had to withdraw some strong charges that had been earlier imposed on